Land of many waters with 6 races living together.
Globespan is a Guyanese dialogue moving towards the realization of one nation in one Guyana. It's a platform that offers an all-inclusive discussion, with the pros, the cons, the ones that is taken aside, and the ones that stand in the middle. Globespan believes agreeing and disagreeing are part of the nation's building. Globespan believes that every Guyanese voice is part of the nation's building. As we span the globe for voices from the diasporas and those living home, we stand on our commitment that we are all Guyanese working towards one nation in one Guyana.
Coffee and Dr. Jagan, Bobby, she gave us our great sons. Rohan Kanhai, Coffee and Dr. Jagan.
As the world turns on its axis bringing changes, we as Guyanese must adopt to those changes for a better Guyana for all. Globespan stands on its axis with its belief that one nation, one Guyana, one destiny must include voices from all corners of Guyana.
Land of many waters with 6 races living together.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you to Mr. Singh for accommodating us on his forum, Globespan. Thank you to Devin for his usual good, efficient work dealing with the technical side of things. We have a topic of discussion today that is no laughing matter at all. It addresses the recent developments which are taking place in the escalation by Venezuela of its border dispute and its claim to 2/3 of Guyana, the county of Essequibo. In our forum today are 2 gentlemen who are knowledgeable on the history of Guyana and the implications of what is going on. We have Dr. Vince Adams, former head of the Guyana Energy Agency, and G.H.K. Lal, who is a well-known social commentator and former activist. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you very much for being here with me on the program.
Thank you. Thank you, Timothy.
Good evening. I wonder if I could start with you, Vincent, in giving a brief summary of what has taken place and where you see us going.
Sure. Good night to your wonderful audience, and thanks for finding the time. And thanks Timothy and Mr. Lal. Here, we're dealing with a situation here which is very, very, very serious. And my big concern is that at least I don't see where we're really taking it as serious as we should have. We should have been taking it. We're dealing with a situation here where the entire population of Venezuela has been indoctrinated. And I don't mean to use that in a derogatory sense. It's the fact. From birth, they've been indoctrinated that Venezuela belongs to them. And here we have, whether you call it migration or refugees moving over into our border, those folks who are coming from Venezuela, they believe that the Essequibo belongs to them. And so we need to have a plan, which maybe we do, in terms of how we accommodate and accept each and every one of the folks that come over here. It shouldn't go far from our thoughts that this here is no different, to me anyway, as to what is happening in Ukraine with Crimea. It's the same excuse that Russia used to invade Crimea and annex it away from Ukraine. And the same thing they've done with Eastern Ukraine. They claim that those areas were Russian-oriented type of folks with Russian culture and everything. and that was the excuse to move in. It's no different to what Venezuela is saying there. So this is a, this is a situation we're dealing now, and now we're starting from behind, whereas Venezuela is way ahead of us in terms of the indoctrination of its citizens and everything else, notwithstanding, of course, the legal aspect of it, the arbitral award of 1899. So we are parsing that route, and I understand that. But then there's that emotional connection to this land that is going to be difficult. And don't let us forget, like I said, Ukraine was what, and we cannot take it for granted that somehow we're going to get support from countries such as the United States. The United States is looking after their interests. And Ukraine, this all started because of that war that happened in Ukraine and the energy crisis. And America had to turn back and bring back Venezuela into the fold. And always remember, folks, it's always about oil. The only reason why we're in the Middle East, for example, and what's going on there, it's because of oil. And Venezuela has 300 billion barrels of oil compared to our 11 at this moment. Maybe we might get up to 15. So where would America interest be? You can wage your bet, but I think if push comes to shove, especially in this energy crisis and energy security, for America and its Western allies, Venezuela is playing a pretty good trump card. And Chevron, for example, has moved back into Venezuela. Chevron has just taken over Hess. Chevron is operating it has a big piece in Suriname, right on our border. Then China strengthening ties with Russia. So all of these things, I think, come together as to where I think we're going to be fighting an uphill battle, and we should not take it for granted that somehow America and any superpower are going to be supporting us. I remember even going back to, I think it was 2019 December. I remember that day distinctly when Exxon ships were chased off, in the Stabroek block that goes west in that area that could be regarded as disputed. They were chased by Venezuela. And I remember I was in a company of a lot of my minister friends, and they were, saying, hey, don't worry about that. America's going to take care of it. They will never allow, Venezuela to prevail. And I had to warn them again, America looks out for what's in its best interest. So here we are. Do not rely upon America or any other, superpower to say that they're going to take our side. We have got to put the emphasis on what we need to do. And I would say right now, to form a focused team of experts, and not for this specific, we need a team that would be permanent with experts to have a plan as to how we address the geopolitics and it's the moving geopolitics, by the way, the economics and even our military build-up. We have to put focus with this oil money to even put a lot of focus in terms of prioritizing our own national security interest with a military build-up. So I'm going to leave it there, Timothy, and until later.
GHK, you heard what Vince is saying. He believes that there needs to be a permanent group of experts who are looking at the political development and applying knowledge to see how best to push back. He included, to my surprise, reference to military buildup. What do you think is the cause of this recent development and move to a referendum, and what do you think is the appropriate response?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Jonas. I have heard the comments from Dr. Adams, and I take a different tact. Certainly, I do agree with him that we need to have a team of experts, professionals, focused full-time on this border controversy, and we haven't done so. We need to educate our people, and I think that we are now beginning to do so. When I look at the intensity and the sustained efforts and energies on the Venezuelan side of the border from the leadership relative to this controversy, and I compare it to what we are doing here, I feel that we are slow in getting off the blocks, and we are now putting our arms together as to what is the best approach. I hear about military buildup, and that's going to take some time. We certainly have the material, the financial assets to do so now, and I am for that. However, I must depart from my brother, Dr. Adams, and say this. America has an interest here, and I'm going to take a wider cut at this, and I'll tell you why. And it's beyond Chevron and Exxon. The fact that Chevron, the number 2 player in the oil, non-governmental oil field in the world, I think it's behind Exxon, it ranks right there with Shell and BP and the others, is now here. It's going to be here in Guyana. That's a plus for us, and it gives America two cards, 2 points of interest to compel it to have a greater look and a closer look at what's going on in Guyana relative to the border controversy. Here is where I am going with this. When Prince Bandar was the darling of the Bushes and was feted at Crawford, Texas, the ranch of the former presidents, America was very much in the focus of the Saudi Arabians and the OPEC bloc. Now the Saudis in OPEC Plus, with Russia there and Iran there, have leaned their oil policy towards what favors the eastern side, the big demand consumers in China and India. And that takes up a lot of oil. Yes, it's cheap oil, but I think America is looking at taking the long view at this and saying, hey, for almost since the 1900s, we have control since the days of Twitchell and Roosevelt going on FDR going on a ship and meeting with the then king, very crude circumstances. America and England have controlled, Western Europe has controlled the flow of oil to the benefit of Western economies. I think that has undergone a shift now. And this is why the arc of Suriname, Venezuela, Guyana, Colombia, Argentina, right in America's lake, Monroe Doctrine held in suspension for a while. This, I think, aggregates to the benefit of Guyana. Is Southern Command going to rechannel redirect some warships in the Caribbean Sea? Possibly. Do we expect to see boots on the ground here? No. Let's not go that far. So any minister or any leader in this country that foresees something like that, I would say no. But because of the relaxation, the partial relaxation of sanctions in Venezuela, I think now the Venezuelans have a vested interest to rebuild their economy and to re-energize their people, to refurbish their infrastructure, which is an oil infrastructure, and which is in tatters, and they really can go back to where they were before, which was 3.2 million barrels a day. Would you believe that? 3.2 million barrels peak in around 2000, 2002. They're about 75% down now, and that has wreaked its toll there. So I see those soldiers walking about and the sun of Venezuela setting or beginning in Essequibo and all of that business and boundaries being redemarcated. And I say to myself, yes, it's good for jingoism. It's good to rally the Venezuelans. We should be doing the same thing. But I still feel that we are in a good position because of Exxon and now Chevron. There's something else going on here. There's something else going on here. Chevron is also in Venezuela. And Citgo, and I feel that more America is going to control this very, very carefully, not just on the political front, but on the economic front. So to rebuild that infrastructure, some of the people that are here, the Halliburtons and the Schlumbergers and whomever else, are expected to take up a presence there. It's going to be all America? No. So I think all of this is going to be good for Guyana. Mr. Maduro is on a short leash, and he knows those sanctions can be reversed, can be slapped on back, and the relaxation can be reversed. I think we need to balance our cards, appeal to the international community, rejuvenate or juvenate. I don't think we've ever done that before. Get the Guyanese people involved, educate them, inform them, marshal them, rally them. And I'm glad to see that the president and the leader of the opposition met after a long time, and their respective groups, about the Venezuelan issue. So I think, one, I depart from Dr. Adams in terms of American interests and possible closer, keener involvement. Two, we need a rapid military buildup. Three, we go back to what we started out with and what he pointed out. We need a professional team. We need an expert team here to give us the kind of guidance that we don't have. We have a new president, a young president, with due respect to him. We have a new opposition leader. Quite frankly, we have a green opposition, considering the names around. And we have, other than the vice president, we have a ex-military man and a prime minister. We certainly could use as much help as we can get from every source. And that's where I stand.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think that one common element, which for me is the most fundamental, is to try to decide how to carry the campaign. Now, let me make this point as loud and clear as I can. Venezuela's got armed forces numbering in excess of 300,000 people. 300,000. So I've heard both of you talk about military. That needs to be thrown out to the window real quick. That's not an option. 300,000 standing military, Air Force, Navy, Army. What we have seen is a lot of hype, a lot of pejorative expressions, a lot of ramping up and ratcheting up and cliches and songs and sound bites. And I think that that is a mistake, because as both of you have said, and this is the part that I want to agree and underline and put an exclamation mark after, we have to understand that our recourse and our resort is to an educated and informed dialogue that understands the history of this issue, understands the rights and the wrongs and the legalities of the issue, because that's where the fight needs to take place. Now, I want to say immediately that both governments in turn, in my view, have done very well in monitoring, maintaining, and pushing as best they could, given the fact that we're no comparison to Venezuela in a fight. But with that background, they have done admirably in putting together legal teams, in presenting their cases in regional and international fora, And in getting this issue put before the International Court of Justice in a way that the International Court of Justice actually has jurisdiction. And that is difficult to do because in international law, you don't give the International Court of Justice jurisdiction unless both parties have acquiesced, have agreed. And in fact, Venezuela's first objection to the International Court of Justice adjudicating on this issue was on the basis that it never agreed. And in fact, it had to be pointed out that when the Geneva Agreement was signed between Britain and Venezuela way back in the 60s, the procedure for peaceful settlement, peaceful resolution of this very issue involved a mechanism that allowed the Secretary General of the United Nations to use his good office, but also allowed the Secretary General to decide the forum in which it would be settled if his good offices didn't work. And by agreeing to that, both sides agreed to accept the forum that the Secretary General chose, and he chose the ICJ. Now, I think that it is important for us to avoid hyperbole and to encourage Guyanese to understand the background, understand the history, and understand the legalities, because we don't win a shouting match. We will lose a shouting match. And a shouting match inevitably will descend to a fight, and we lose a fight. So either we calmly and rationally educate our population so that our population can calmly and rationally debate and contest the points on which we are relying in any area, in any forum, or we run into problems. Now, from the time of Chedi Jagan back in the 60s, when Venezuela tried to delay out the grant of independence, and there's even claims that Venezuela was behind the Rupununi uprising, trying to undermine our claim in the Essequibo. Our governments, in turn, have done, in my view, an extremely good job trying to keep the issue in the forefront in terms of United Nations mechanisms and procedures, in terms of keeping it calm and peaceful. And I want to express my appreciation for that. And it continues even to earlier this week, when the president and the leader of the opposition together issued a joint statement. That has taken the shape over the years, so that in 2018, when the Secretary General decided to refer the issue to the International Court of Justice, Guyana was able to use its legal team and its legal experience that had been garnered from the previous dispute recently resolved against Suriname in the same forum, was able to use that experience and that expertise to formulate its case, and very promptly in 2018, refer the dispute to the ICJ. Now, this is the first thing I want Guyanese to think about, and anyone listening on this program to think about. If you have a situation where two parties are quarreling, and one party is happy to say, look, let's refer this dispute to the highest legal tribunal in the world that can look at the history, look at what took place, look at the previous agreements and arbitrations, look at the treaties, look at the maps, look at everything, and decide who is right and who is wrong. And Guyana has always said, let us go that route. From the time in 2018, the Secretary General said, you got to go to the ICJ. Guyana has always been happy to go that route, and Venezuela has steadfastly refused to cooperate. In my mind, that creates an alarm, because it tells me that there is some kind of confidence in the Guyana team, that we got some right, we got some justification underpinning our claim, our side. And it makes me curious and interested to know why Venezuela is trying to avoid recourse to the legal tribunal that has the power to make the decision, and has on 2 occasions tried to avoid it, disputing the jurisdiction of that tribunal. That raises alarms. And in this forum tonight, I hope that we can look at the history of what has taken place, so that we're not just speaking in terms of hype and hyperbole, but we can communicate to our listeners, and hopefully they can spread the message, why it is that we believe we are in the right and we are willing to risk, as our leaders have already instituted the proceedings in the ICJ and the International Court of Justice, that we want that forum, that tribunal of judges, to vindicate our position and to decide and to tell the world what the true legal position is and what the true boundary is between Guyana and Venezuela. I think that is the route we have to go, calmly, rationally, from an informed position. I hope, Vince, that I can persuade you that perhaps we can take our discussion that way into the history of how this thing lined up.
Oh, sure. No, I don't agree with anything there. As a matter of fact, when I talked with military, I was talking long term again. What I'm saying is that we need to have a permanent, a focused permanent, where it's a part of the foreign affairs ministry or whatever, but a focused team to plan infinitum. That team should be a permanent, resident type of a team, because the geopolitics change all the time, and that's what drives most of this. And we just can't react to when something happens, then we react to try to go solve it. We need to have that team together. Well, of course, in addition to the education on this particular issue, because I said we're up against, on the other side, where people have been educated from birth on one way. So it's part of their DNA. We have not been doing that. So now we've got to catch up. So that education is a key focus. And of course, working the diplomatic channel. And this, again, I'm not a lawyer, but based on everything that I know and read, I don't think that Venezuela has any reasonable chance of being victorious in the ICJ, and I believe that is the reason why they're flexing their muscles. And so when I talk about military build, I'm not talking about the long term, because we will never get, probably going to take forever. But we need to, as part of that strategy, that long term or even lifelong strategy, we need to really look at building up our national security strength to maybe throughout the life. I'm not talking about in this particular case, but over the life, we've got to, to me, we've got to do. I mean, if you look at Venezuela is only relatively recently that Venezuela became pretty powerful militarily, relatively speaking. And if you look at a lot of countries, the reason why they're not being touched is because of their military strength. I'm not saying we do it for offensive purposes, but to make sure that we can defend our territory or even discourage others from doing the kind of thing, the threat that we are under here today. I think, but that's more long term. But I agree with both of you gentlemen that education. We've got to go there, because But I always look at the geopolitics, and it's a changing. It's a change. It changes dynamically, from day to day. And this, we would not have been. I don't think we would have been that Venezuela would have been emboldened at this time had it not been for the U.S. coming back after the Ukraine war and the pressure that the U.S. and Europe are under for within that energy crisis that they're seeing. U.S. came and opened up back Venezuela. So I think that they've been emboldened. And in terms of Chevron, obviously, yes, Chevron is operating on both sides. And don't let us forget 1962, there was a common interest that coincided between Venezuela and the U.S. When, you remember, from 2005, Venezuela had accepted, going back to 1899, 2005, they accepted the boundaries. in 2005, and then suddenly in 1962 they brought it back up again and say, you know, we don't want to recognize it. That it wasn't a coincidence that at the same time, you remember that Cherry, as a matter of fact, it's in this. I think I can't remember the book, but it's well documented that the U.S. was against Cherry being elected as the was that time it was the premier of Guyana because they thought he was a communist. So here you had two interests coinciding that allowed him of Venezuela to bring that up back again in 1962. So we also, like you said, we've got to look at those history and don't let us believe that somehow, the big superpowers such as Exxon are somehow going to side with us and bail us out. Even look, and I think look at Petrocarib. I think Venezuela has laid the foundation even within our own region for support. I saw they came out with a statement today. I don't think it was strong enough, but nevertheless they came out with a statement of support. But Petrocarib, and I was one of those in 2005, by the way, who publicly criticized Petrocarib, tried to discourage a lot of companies. I held a press conference. I was still with the U.S. government, a press conference in Puerto Rico, and I said, going through the details, it was Venezuela's attempt to win influence and long-term influence at that, long-term influence. And I think Petrocarib is one of the things that is paying dividends right now. Look at Barbados. They accommodated Maduro and his opposition to go and make that pact that they're going to stand together. Mia was in Venezuela, received the highest honor and award. So, I think we, like you said, we need to look at history, and that is why we need a team to pull all of these things together so that we can have a coordinated, some really strategic thinking to take all of these different issues and elements into consideration as we move forward, rather than just reacting and the politicians reacting. We need a team of really strong experts to in addition to the education, by the way, because I think that's very important, as I said, and we're catching up.
GHQ, how do you see the motivations of the real powers in the region, the Americans, the English, and the other superpowers, and Brazil, influencing what is going on, and how do you think they'll be able to either help or hurt what to me is a strong moral and legal position that Guyana has?
Before I answer that, address that question, I'm just looking at this headline that came out from Demerara Waves a moment ago. It says, Venezuela-Guyana border, Bipartisan Foreign Relations Committee agrees to table parliamentary motion, ramp up public awareness. So we are on the move. We may be a little late, a little slow, as I said, but we are on the move. Militarily, just one moment, bear with me. Militarily, we cannot compete. So I hear you, Mr. Jonas. But at the same time, for 300,000, I mean, that's almost like our adult population. And all it takes, we have that seawall down there, so I don't have to tell you more. One plane, one bomb, one strike. That's all we have to say. And the rest can, I don't mean to scare anybody, but that's the reality of our situation. Now, the global powers have a role to play here. Brazil has made clear where it stands, that we must resolve this thing, and Brazil has a big footprint in this region. CARICOM has made clear where it stands. That referendum, it's a domestic construct. United States in this area, it might be a fading world power, but the United States has to take the lead. And where the United States go, I think it is reasonably safe to think that the British and the Canadians are going to go. Let us not forget that the Chinese have a 25% stake in the Stabroek Bloc, but the Chinese also have, I think they are owed billions in Venezuela. They may be among the people like Russia and Iran and others who are owed. So it's in their interest to have this thing resolved peacefully. I am thinking that because there is a sort of a rapprochement between, and let's be guarded about that, between the Americans and the Venezuelans, that stands favorably for us because there is communication, there is a connection, however tenuous that might be. And because America is so vested here, that accrues to our benefit. Look, let's look the other way to that question. If there was a Chinese or an Indian or a British, a European firm, ENI, Total, British Petroleum, now known as BP, if they were here digging for oil out there, exploring, I think the Venezuelans would have been much more aggressive. That's my where I am. Because it's the Americans and because we have had secretaries of state coming to this hitherto backwater country, Pompeo and then Mr. Blinken, those things mean something. In diplomatic, understated manner, those things convey a message that Guyana counts. Guyana is in such a place and space that within 3 years, we could have two American secretaries of state come here. We could have our president meeting, I would say not so infrequently, with the vice president of the United States and with leading congressmen and so on and so forth. So very, very pointedly, narrowly, the superpowers have a role to play. As to where Russia is in this, we are not so favorably looking towards Russia, and I don't think Russia may look upon us as a friend anymore like before. So that's a wild card there. But definitely America, England, Canada, the Commonwealth countries, that's 55 nations. Those CARICOM, I mean, there's some overlap there. Those would be interested in having this thing resolved in a peaceful manner, in a non-hostile manner. I think one of the things, and I'm going a bit away from the thing here now, why Venezuela is so adamant about the ICJ and it will not accept this and that and whatever adjudication comes out of that, and it wants to sit across the table. I have a feeling, well, it's clear that it knows that its position, it's not as strong as it should be. It's pretty fragile. However, in a conversation, I think it is interested in bartering. We're talking 50,000 plus square miles here. We're talking 2/3 of Guyana. So you could say, look, we could put this to bed. We could put this to bed once and for all time to come. And you don't have to be hanging over your head, and we don't have to be talking about this because this is a deal consummated between us. I think you go back to 1899 and the Paris Accord, and you come down, and that was pretty quiet. And then you get, I think it was 1966, the Mixed Boundary Commission, and then you come now to 2018 and the ICJ, the United Nations, and so on and so forth. But let's face this fact also, no Venezuelan politician of ambition, no Venezuelan leader in government could ever turn his back or deny or minimize the claim to Guyana Essequiba. No, Romulo Betancourt didn't do that. Carlos Andres Perez also. And you can go further back to those generals and admirals and whomever. So here's it. We have a combination of things going for us. The ICJ so far has made some sounds that are in Guyana's favor. And I think an adjudication it looks well for us. In addition to that, or adjacent to that, we have foreign superpowers, the United States, England, the United Kingdom, and I think the others are, I don't want to say on our side, but they're leaning in our direction to say, hey, this thing really should be resolved in your favor. That's my conclusion. That's my interpretation of where things stand. Venezuela, on the other hand, Venezuela is poised. It's kind of poised precariously. It's sort of a pariah state. Sanctions have been partially relaxed. It really has to tread very carefully and very, very thoughtfully, very gingerly in how it handles the next few months. Because you've got 6 months, a window of 6 months, and then a month by month. You have got things, the Center for Strategic Studies and all these places are commenting and saying, what will Maduro do? He's got this lady, Maria Cochina Machado, and she's not recognized, although I think she's the leading opposition voice that has emerged. And something is going to have to give there, or else we're going to be back to the days of sanctions. And who knows where that could push the Venezuelans to. But are they going to trip that wire and engage in real a shooting match? I don't think it's going to get there. We have too many foreign assets on our side, and that's where I stand.
Quickly before you, I just not to let this thought go here in terms of the superpowers and who they support. Let's not forget that the biggest superpower, America, right now, the politics is in a turmoil. I mean, I know that firsthand. And lo and behold, you get a president such as a Donald Trump coming back. And by the way, the polls are running neck and neck, believe it or not. But you get a president, there's nobody probably on this planet who's more transactional than a Donald Trump. And we saw where he would be more leaning to. He loves strong men. So those are the kind of political and geopolitical dynamics that I'm talking about in terms of, the shifting geopolitics all the time and that is why it's so necessary again for us to not be reacting, but to be keeping up with the times, to follow the geopolitics and to make decisions and to be agile in our thinking. So, and that is why I keep emphasizing, I don't think we can rely upon depending upon saying, well, okay, we're going to get US support or Britain support. And you're absolutely correct, because I believe, obviously now the United States is leading the West without question. And wherever they go, that's where the rest will follow. But as I've seen, the Ukraine war has really put the United States and its allies in a jam. And that's what brought Venezuela back into the fold. So again, I'm looking long term in terms of, okay, what happens if we change? If the politics change in the United States and we get a president such as Donald Trump, who knows what will happen?
Before you come in, Mr. Jonas, just permit me this 10-second comment. Let us all recall, in the context of who is our friend and who isn't, and who may be or maybe not, let us recall that famous phrase from Lord Palmerston about permanent interests versus permanent friends.
Yeah.
So I think that, and there's some permanent interest in this country, all right? So I leave that at this.
I think the permanent interest is supersedes the permanent friends. That's been my point, GHK. That's been my point.
Yes,
The
and that is well
permanent
taken.
interest supersedes the permanent friends.
Yes.
Okay. One thing I noted is that there seemed to be a view when you were speaking that we are not as adept as Venezuela has been in, to use the expression that I think is inaccurate, educating our population. And you made the point that every Venezuelan is, again, I use the word educated as to the position with the Guyana border. And therefore, there's no doubt about this referendum and what the outcome of the referendum will be. I'm not sure I agree with that. And I want to draw the distinction between an education and brainwashing, propaganda. You see, either you are educated and therefore you understand the dynamics and you understand the variables, you understand the history, and you understand the permutations, or you've been brainwashed and you rely on rhetoric and you say it's we own. Now, I use that expression deliberately as we own, because there is not a single Guyanese who will hear that expression and not recognize it. There's not a single Guyanese that expression doesn't resonate with, is we own, as Essequibo is we own. So in terms of informing and bringing it to the forefront of the public, we've done it as well as anybody. Everybody knows what that means. We made a song, not a blade of grass. But the method of bringing it to the attention of Guyanese has been in the form of hyperbole. It's been in the form of cliches, not a blade of grass, as Essequibo is we own. That's not education, that's propaganda. And I think that if we are sure, as I am sure, I'm satisfied, that our position, both ethically, historically, legally, in all three ways, is correct, then it is a mistake to resort to hyperbole and that kind of superficial approach. Because that is what the Venezuelans have done. That is why every Venezuelan you speak to has known the map from the day he was born, that Essequibo is part of Venezuela, and doesn't look behind that to see why. So I'm going to ask your forbearance, because I want to spend 10 minutes and I want to practice what I've been preaching. I want to provide a history of what has happened, giving my take on the background, on how it has evolved, and why I believe we are in the right. And I want to do it in this forum because if you put it in writing, it's painful and monotonous and people won't read it. But in this forum, people may listen and may pick up a snippet, may agree or disagree, it may spark a conversation, but the conversation will be the kind of informed, educated, collegiate conversation that I think Guyanese have to have, not hyperbole. So allow me, please. I ask your forbearance, just give me 10 minutes. I want to start with Christopher Columbus. The gentleman came down here in 1492. Now, he was sent by Spain, and immediately enormous riches started to go from the New World back to Spain and to Portugal, which was next door and immediately benefited. And only 2 years later, in 1494, the Pope, the Catholic Pope, orchestrated and approved a treaty between Spain and Portugal that split the New World in half and gave half to Spain and half to Portugal. That's the Treaty of Tordesillas that was done in 1494. Now you might imagine all these powers that we know about, France, England, the Dutch, excluded from this. And in those early days, they had very little input. And it's interesting that just within 30 years after that, England had left the Pope and declared an independent Church of England. Martin Luther in the Netherlands had started the reformist movement and had rejected Catholicism. So you had this breakaway from Catholicism. But in the next couple hundred years, these little small countries from up north, England, the Netherlands, France, started coming down and making their own foothold. So that the Dutch were in the Guyanas very shortly after. And in the 1600s, you had this war between the Dutch and the Spanish in the Guyanas, which the Dutch won. And it resulted in a treaty in 1648, which established the Dutch foothold in the Guyanas, and Spain, as a signatory to that treaty, recognized the presence of the Dutch in the Guyanas. So it's no longer, oh, under this treaty, the Pope gave us the whole place. By the mid-1600s, the Dutch were there. Every Guyanese knows that in 1803, you had this war between England and the Dutch. England won the war, and England took Guyana away from the Dutch. Everybody knows that. And in fact, that was formalized by a treaty in 1814, where Holland ceded the Guyanas to England, and British Guyana became known as British Guyana. So early 1800s, you got British Guyana established. The problem with that is that British Guyana was Berbice, Demerara, Essequibo, but we know how big Essequibo is. And the western boundary of Essequibo was never clearly established in those early arrangements. You just had some colonists planting sugar and corn and coffee and all the other things they were planting in the Pomeroon River. But that western boundary at the time was not established. So in the 1830s, the British sent out a gentleman, a surveyor called Schlumberg. And Schlumberg drew what he felt was the correct western boundary of Essequibo, of British Guyana. So he did this in the 1830s. And Venezuela, which by then was an independent country, protested against Great Britain. So against a superpower, not against Little Guyana. Great Britain was at the time running the country, running the colony, and said, Schomburg is stealing our land. The Pope gave the Spanish this land all the way back in the 1400s, and we have inherited from Spain because we are Spanish, and the line got to be where Essequibo is. That is where the fight started, in the 1830s with Schomburg's line. And this is where it gets important. Between the 1830s and the 1890s, Venezuela pestered and hounded the Americans under the principle of the Monroe Doctrine, which provides, as James Monroe, one of their early presidents, I think the third president, said, that the Americas are the province of America. They will not allow any further expansion of European powers there. The European powers must understand this is the provenance of America. And Venezuela, relying on that, went to the Americans and said, we need arbitration to resolve where this boundary is. The reason that's important is that the 1899 arbitration was at the instance of Venezuela. Britain didn't want it. In fact, the US president at the time, President Cleveland, passed a motion through the American Congress insisting that a commission of surveyors would be appointed and America would defend the decision of those commissions, quote, by any means necessary. That means also war. At that point, England, recognizing America as bigger and more powerful, capitulates and says, all right, we'll go to arbitration. So therefore, at the instance of Venezuela, under scrutiny from America, England appointed 2 arbitrators, Venezuela appointed 2 arbitrators, and those 4 arbitrators appointed a 5th arbitrator, and those arbitrators sat down in Paris, and they heard all the evidence, and they unanimously found in 1899 that Schomburg's line, representing the western boundary of Essequibo as we know it, the one that is familiar to us Guyanese, is the correct boundary between British Guyana and Venezuela. Now, there's no running away from that. At Venezuela's instance, we went to arbitration, and Schomburg's line was affirmed by the arbitrators, 2 of whom were selected by the Venezuelans, 2 by the British, and the 5th by those 4 arbitrators, unanimously. And the Venezuelans agreed. And a team of surveyors appointed by the Venezuelans and the Britons went down and surveyed and drew a map. And both governments, British and Venezuelan, accepted that map, showing Schomburg's line with the boundary where we know it now. Now that's the history. The reason there is a dispute now is that one of the young lawyers who was in that tribunal, in that arbitration proceedings, he died in 1949 and he left some memoir. And in that memoir, he said that there was pressure and collusion in the arbitration award. Now, he said so. And I want our listeners to think about it. He said so. So Venezuela relied on that in the 1950s to say that because he said so, the award is void. Now, everybody has heard the expression hearsay. So they heard this lawyer say, who's now dead, 50 years after the fact, that there was collusion. And because they heard him say that, they said they believe him and the award is void. There is very good reason why the Venezuelans don't want that to go to the ICJ for a ruling, because that is some of the most stupidness you will hear from adults at the level of government in a long time. And that is why they are twisting and turning to avoid going to the ICJ for a ruling on the validity of an arbitration award that they asked for, that they agreed to, and are now on spurious grounds trying to avoid 100 years after the fact. The reason that the history is important of the arbitration award is that, in the words of GHK, it finally solved the matter. So I don't want to suggest that there needs to be going back to the drawing board or a bargain now or an agreement, because there was a bargain and a drawing board and an agreement in 1899, and it was finally resolved. And it was resolved lawfully in a procedure that the Venezuelans agreed to, in fact, that the Venezuelans insisted on, and under the auspices of President Cleveland of the United States and Secretary of State Almy at the time, pushing it through Congress and insisting that this has to be done by any means necessary. So when we speak about US involvement, the US involvement is over 100 years old. And one thing that I believe is important for US self-respect, and they have been constant in that, and in their diplomatic relations, part of the reason they get international respect, besides the fact that they're the biggest superpower there, is that they are constant in decisions that they have made and policies that they implement. And their policy implemented that this arbitration award must take place was done under their scrutiny at their instance. And I believe that the point needs to be made very strongly to them that they need to back up what they did and what they insisted on and the result of their own actions. Now, again, I want to commend both governments in turn. And I want to make the point that recently, President Ali came under a lot of criticism for his refusal to, quote, renegotiate the Exxon contract. But Lee Kuan Yew made an important point years ago, that when you make a contract with these investors, you keep your contract, you keep your word, you keep your promise, even if you make a bad contract, because that is what creates the stability and the security and the predictability that keeps investors interested, keeps them with you, keeps them going forward, and keeps the countries which they represent satisfied and on board. And I believe that it was very wise to honor the arrangements which have been made so that we can now say to those countries who are represented, we have done right by you. Look at what Venezuela has done. We understand the need for a negotiation with Venezuela to bring them back into the fold, but it cannot be done at the expense of the country who is now coming out of poverty, who has been constant and consistent, who is legally and ethically in the right. And that is the approach we have to take. But for me, that approach needs to be taken calmly and rationally, and it needs to be in the form of a discussion that every Guyanese can carry, to say this is the history, this is how it was done. Not in the form of cliches and hyperbole, but in the way to challenge anyone to say, is your argument really, as a Venezuelan, that when a man died, and in his memoir he said there was collusion, that you are going to rely on that 60 years after a unanimous arbitration decision by arbitrators, two of whom you appointed, Is that really the material that you are relying on to rock the stability in the region, to erode what is a safe and stable environment commercially, politically, socially in the region? Because things are so bad with you, Maduro, that you want to turn Venezuelan attention from your own inept leadership to try to find a way to galvanize them and unite them. That is where our conversation has to go. I hope it doesn't go beyond that, but we do need to bring in and encourage the foreigners, the Americans, the Brazilians, and the Caribbean. Our Caribbean neighbors have issued a statement that was very useful, very helpful, and they have shown solidarity with us. We got to bring these people to understand that they have to follow the procedures that allow stability and peace to continue, because they can't succeed any other way. They may be strong, but that is not how it works anymore.
Quickly, sorry.
Yes, please.
Quickly, to touch on your history there, I think there was a little bit of detail that is relevant to today in terms of what Venezuela is doing. During that whole Schomburg putting together that map and all this kind of stuff, Venezuela made it an issue somehow that there was a gold shout. And I can't remember when it was, 1895.
1800, yes.
And in that gold shout, Venezuela say, no, this, I want this part of it because this is where the gold belonged to, etc. And why I say that? Because I do not believe that this would have suddenly been coming to the fore in such an aggressive manner had Guyana not discovered oil offshore. So that's the relevance between the 1895 when they made a big issue out of it, and then the other thing, this whole thing about America. I think, to paraphrase, our policy abroad is stable. That's far from the reality right now. As a matter of fact, even our European friends, they've got the biggest doubt. Trump changed everything. Trump changed everything during the period, and he's left a lot of doubts as to whether America, our foreign policy, whether they can really rely upon it, and that's a fact. So that is why I mentioned the importance of that. Not to get off a track, of course I disagree with your renegotiation part of the contract, because with what Ali said, I don't agree with that, because there's a reason why a clause is in that contract that says that you can't change that contract. There's a clause in there. It's the reason why it's there. And secondly, in any contract internationally, as long as there's a major change, you do have a justification for at least, requesting a change to the contract. And there was no question that there was a big change in terms of lots of things in the contract. And the other thing, the contract was changed. I mean, matter of fact, when I was at EPA, I always say this, that whole unlimited liability coverage, that was a major change. The contract says self-insurance. And I said, absolutely not. Parent company has to guarantee a coverage. They agreed to it. We put it in the permit, which made it became law. And then the other thing is that we changed at EPA was, in the contract, it says we had to give them 7 days notice to visit the site. We said, absolutely not. We shall have unfettered access up to and including an announced visit. That was also put into the permit. So they cut this whole thing about sanctity. Here's a sanctity that we broke. We were only allowed 2 years to start the audit of the contract. How long did it take us to audit to have the force audit? What is it? Or whatever years it was, 20 years. So this whole thing about sanctity, and that is why the contract has that clause in there that says you can change that contract as long as you get both parties to agree. Except that we've never even asked. We've never even requested or asked for consideration to change the contract. I just wanted to bring that up there.
Gentlemen, my take on this is, first of all, I must commend you, Mr. Jonas, on your walking back and walking us
through history.
Pretty impressive. Some of that stuff I happen to know, and some I didn't know at all. So I thank you for that. Now, I heard something in your presentation, and the Venezuelans are basing, or were basing, their claim due to their links with the Spanish. The Spanish relinquished their claims, their rights, to the Dutch. The Dutch got defeated in war, and that ended up with the British. Therefore, there's a space there for me. So as to tell me that, you know, your claim is based on Spanish relationship and the history that goes back to Columbus and whomever else, and the treaty and those popes, of one of which I'm a part of. So, and the division of the world. Yes, when the Spanish relinquish all of its rights to the Dutch, the Venezuelans don't have a leg to stand on anymore. In terms of renegotiation, I think I've made myself clear, and I want to go back to something. I am for renegotiation, and the lawyer in you and the citizen in all of us, the patriots in all of us, gentlemen, including those who are listening, our sisters and brothers, there is no goddamn contract in the world that can supersede my parliament, my ability to make laws, my president's authority, my national sovereignty. No, might be hyperbole, but I would like for that to be tested. As Vincent just said, we're not even asking the question. We're not even saying, well, we gone from 3 to 11. Let me have a conversation here. I go back to what I've been saying for the last 6 years. I don't like this contract, but I understand 2%. And the 2% is the premium that the insurance that we have paid, which is coming in good stead now, serving us in good stead now. So it goes back to the earlier questions and the earlier points about where is America? Where is America? Yep. And we know where America goes, the rest goes. Forget about who sneezes and who catch cold and all them things. Where America goes, the rest follows, especially in this hemisphere. I think it's fair to say that the Democrats, Americans, have lost the Middle East, at least the Saudi Arabians, for the foreseeable future. Therefore, the primacy and the paramountcy of this arc of oil, of this hemispheric arc, cannot be denied, or is unprecedented in terms of its value to the American economic and military and other machineries. Now, 2% buys us, in my mind, according to my way of thinking, an Exxon here, investors not spooked, to use the words paraphrase the words of a notable Guyanese, and investors are skittish and all of that business. So here, the rubber has to hit the road here. The Venezuelans are rattling their sabers, and I don't think they'll go beyond that, because we have paid our dues, 2% and 50-50 and all the other things that goes into that. And now it's time for the Americans to pony up. Don't expect the Marines to hit the beach. Don't expect the Air Force and so on. I am saying that the permanent interests are here. Guyana might be a secondary friend, but it's a convenient friend. It's a necessary friend given the Middle East, given OPEC Plus. Venezuela is a founding member of OPEC. However, I believe that our cheap oil, our high quality oil, and the Venezuelan quantity of oil, heavy as it may be, I think the pendulum has shifted considerably and conspicuously to the point where we are sitting fairly well. In terms of your point about education and so on, I think we have to start this thing from primary. Nursery might be too young and say, Essequibo belongs to you. Sociology and social studies and history and Caribbean studies and whatever they do now, I've been out of that loop for about 5 years. Well, I mean, I was at the higher levels, but it's got to start from the cradle. We've got to let our people know. You see that same line? Maybe they should get you to go and give some of those things to the CXC students and say, this land is your land. And here's why. And you go from the Pope, and I know a place where you can go. There are lots of Catholics there, and say, this is the story here, A, B, C, D, Schomburg and Dutch and Spanish and Americans. And it's a good civics lesson. It's a good history lesson that we all need to know. Look, I think I know some of these things fairly well, and I didn't know some of those things. So that's good. So if we get our children, who are going to be our adults and part of the youthful demographic, which is the biggest one, I think that forms the basis for the patriotism that is now such an anachronism in this country, that these people want your land, well, they have to come and take it. But at the same time, we must be smart enough to relate to the assets, the foreign assets that we would have in terms of countries in the region and internationally. And I think the president and the government has done a pretty good job at that. In terms of the domestic side, some work has to be done. Some considerable work has to be done. And look, the Venezuelans are whipping look, I think you call it brainwashing, Mr. Jonas. I see it as whipping their people into a frenzy. That referendum is a done deal. That is a done deal. You don't even got to joke the thing, right? So come December 3rd, yes, citizenship, the state of Guyana Essequibo, and it's ours, and citizenship and all that business. The other four questions, that's question number 5. The other questions kind of feed into that. So I think they have set the stage as to what happens next as a practical matter after that referendum. It's 5 weeks away. It would be telling. I was about to say interesting. It would be telling as to what the next steps of Venezuela are after that, and where the international community, especially our American friends, are in this respect.
Yep. You want to go ahead? Go ahead, Tim.
Mr. Jonas, you're on mute.
Oh,
Thanks, Vince. I'm not going to be enticed now into a debate on renegotiation, except to say 2 things in response to you, Vince. If I agree to buy a car for $20, and then tomorrow we come back and we agree, man, I didn't realize that the tire was flat, only paying 18, and you say, okay, of course, we both agreed and I pay 18. And that's very simply what I think so many people are trying to fancy up and conflate. That this nice clause that you're talking about for renegotiation says exactly that. Both sides got to agree. It's not more fancy or more complicated than that. And what unfortunately has been happening is too many Guyanese have been segueing from that into, so we can therefore unilaterally renegotiate. And it doesn't work like that. And I'm sure you will realize from what GHK just said, sovereignty and parliament and all of that trumps contract, that's where he's going. But that is very, very dangerous, because it is exactly what creates a skittish, to use his word, investor. But I'll go further, why it's so dangerous. The agreement to go to arbitration is just an agreement, it's a contract. Venezuela signed the contract to go to arbitration. And if you take GHK's logic to its conclusion, you realize how dangerous it is. Because they're now having a referendum to say, don't worry with contract, don't worry with arbitration. It can't fly. Either we obey the law, we adhere to legal responsibilities, but you don't get it both ways. You either obey all the time when it's convenient as well as when it's inconvenient, or we have arbitrariness and instability. And from my side, I will insist, convenient or inconvenient, Lee Kuan Yew had it right. You honor your obligations, your word is your bond, your handshake must mean something, whether it's convenient or inconvenient. And in the long run, I think doing the right thing will bring its own reward. That is what we have to rest on. That is where we have to hang our hat. And that is the high road we have to take when we're negotiating with the states about the arbitration proceedings that they insisted on and facilitated. When we're talking to the states about the protection of Exxon, their company that we have protected and we have honored our dealings with. When we talk to Brazil about our transactions with them and how Venezuela must not be allowed to expand and threaten us, we have to take the high road and be able to rely not just on talking when it's convenient to us, but on our actions and our deeds that have demonstrated that we are a reliable trading partner and we are a reliable neighbor in this hemisphere. And that is what I'm getting at. I think that is more important than anything. Gentlemen, we are at nearly 10 to 9, and I will ask you please for your closing statements going forward, where you think we go and what advice you have for our government and our leaders, both in government and in opposition, how we move forward.
You want me to go first, or?
I don't like this moderator role. If you want to go first, please go first.
I'll go first. Of course, it's just summarizing what I mentioned earlier. My priorities right now in terms of obviously, I think it's by consensus. I think we all agree that education. We have to do that. Now, the one thing that I forgot to even mention was, it seems as if, and I could be wrong again, that our intelligence, we need to have for real-time intelligence in the short term at our border. I don't know what's happening. I hear all kinds of reports. The Taliban may not be even manned properly. The government should not be only dependent upon the media coverage and media information. And that's the impression that I'm getting. Again, I could be wrong, but we need to have first-hand intelligence as to what's going on. So, and the education part of it, it needs to be communicated to the public. When John Public out there, if you go ask John Public, well, what is going on? They think that everything is, we're having parties, things are just, it's no big deal. I think the government needs to have, whether it's one night, every other night or something, the president needs to come out and give a speech and to keep people engaged in terms of understanding. This here is really, really important. And of course, the other thing that I said there is to have this focused team of exports, not for a short term, but for the long term, to take all of the elements for the long term and for the life term, I would prefer to term it, as to keep up with the changing dynamics and everything else. So I think those are the key things. And then, of course, don't be carried away by or assume that somehow the superpowers are going to fall in line because we might be a more democratic country than Exxon again. Than Venezuela. Again, they're going to follow America. And right now, American foreign policy is not stable. It's very, very uncertain. Even our domestic policy is very, very uncertain. It's sheer basically chaos going on right now in Congress. So if we get a president again, such as Trump, the transactional part of him, it's not going to be easy for us. So that is why we need to be really having this export focus team to be keeping up with the politics and the geopolitics and those type of things as to where we go into the future. But it's very encouraging, at least to see that the government and the opposition have come together and they're joined at the hip in this. And so that's very encouraging. And I hope that that dialogue continues. And you know, it's not just for a photo op yesterday or whenever they met. And I hope that really continues. And I think the entire population of Guyana was thrilled to see that happen.
Well, it's good to see you have a Speaker of the House, Dr. Adams, and he is recognized as a right winger, an extreme ideologue. So we can see how they're going to work out. Anyhow, look.
That's right. That's exactly the turmoil that I'm talking about here. Who knows where this is going to end?
If there's one thing that came out of this Venezuelan development, is that the government and the opposition sat around the same table, gentlemen. For 3 years and 2 months approximately, they've been talking over each other, around each other, past each other, and so on and so forth. It's good to see them looking each other in the eye and say, this is an existential issue and menace, and we need to put our shoulders together. We need to wrap our minds around this thing, and I think a start has been made. To leverage off of your point, we've got to build on that. And the language so far coming out of the government is commendable, and the opposition also. It's been sober, it's been controlled, and it's got to stay that way. I think we have set the standard in terms of which we are going to communicate this issue to the world, whether it's regional or international, and it's a good standard, and we must not deviate from that. We must rally the court of public and international opinion on our side. Nothing is going to be easy here. The Venezuelans are not going to reverse their course come December 3rd and beyond. I think there's too much at stake for them. But we have started out on the right foot, and we have to build on that. Militarily, it helps that we can beef up our intelligence and our capacity in so many ways, but we have to be practical and realistic. It is politically what is going to drive the environment, the social environment, is what's going to power our interests, our passions. And I think we have to keep the passions muted. Like I said just now, sober, calm, controlled, and we are there. We must never let go of that. We must impress people. We must impress the powers that be as to the rightness of our cause and of the immovability of our position. I think we're in a good place, and on that note, I say good night to each one of you and to my fellow citizens who are listening.
Thank you, sir. It was a pleasure. Thanks again to Nohar Singh and to Devin. It was an interesting conversation. I enjoyed interacting with you. We didn't quarrel enough, but I guess you don't get all things in life. I'm sure we find ourselves facing off in another forum on another topic. I certainly hope so. Thank you to our listeners, and thanks to Globespan. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.